Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. You've reached the No Name Cinema Society, the film review show that dares to dig just a little bit deeper. It's a special Wednesday episode tonight, Wednesday, December 30th, 2020. And we're kicking off our 63rd series of episodes tonight with a review of the current feature, the big film of the moment, Wonder Woman 1984. Hi, everybody. My name is Jonathan Betson, one of your hosts here for the evening. I hope you guys all had a Merry Christmas. I'm in Astoria, New York, one of the two Astoria apartments that I cat sit at from time to time. And I'll be back to LA this weekend for the next episode, and then back here in Astoria later this year for our 64th set of episodes. We've taped two episodes here in the past in this particular apartment, episode 55.1 from July of 2019, in which we discussed the film Stuber, and episode 56.3 in September of 2019, where we discussed the film Driving Miss Daisy. And of course, I mentioned this is episode 63.1, current feature. We're going to discuss Wonder Woman 1984, and I've got a couple of terrific co-hosts to discuss the film with me. First, ladies and gentlemen, the all-powerful Nordic god of below the liners, Alex Evans, is here with a stash. He's got a stash, ladies and gentlemen.
Hello, everyone. Just wanted to look villainous like David Thewlis in the first Wonder Woman movie.
Also with us, ladies and gentlemen, my late friend that I wished back into existence, Devon Michaels, is here.
Hello. I'm happy to exist.
Welcome back from the dead, Devon. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, it's time for me to go over our schedule for this, our 63rd series episodes. Of course, it starts tonight with our review of Wonder Woman 1984. This upcoming Monday, January 4th, we're going to do the Indie Spotlight 45 years. And then next Thursday, January 7th, will be a classic movie discussion of David Fincher's Seven. And then on Monday, January 11th, will be our 47th Sound Off, our freeform segment. I'm going to do a book review. We're going to do an obscure movie discovery. And we're going to count down the top 5 senior citizen films of all time. Are you guys ready for the summary?
Go for it.
All right. Wonder Woman 1984. Hard film to summarize. Wonder Woman is chilling in the 1980s, working for the Smithsonian, subversively stopping crime when she can. One bank robbery she stops leads to the discovery of a dream stone, an ancient object that grants wishes. When the stone falls into the wrong hands in prospective oil magnate Maxwell Lord, Diana must figure out how to retrieve the stone without reversing the wish she inadvertently made on it. The wish to bring her love, Steve Trevor, back to life. So guys, how was that summary?
Spoiler proof.
I tried.
I mean, I guess from it's all things you'd know from the trailer.
Again, also the point. So, mission accomplished. Okay, so
I mentioned it's a compliment.
Before we get to opening thoughts, the reason I wanted to do this movie, and we usually have more gap in between episodes instead of 9 days, is that Wonder Woman is sort of a part of our history here on the channel. I did a blog on the like a mini review of the film, a vlog number 50, in 2017, and also it appeared as number 9 on Devon's top 10 films of 2017. Here's a little clip of Devon and I talking about it from 2017.
The movie is Wonder Woman. I thoroughly loved this movie. I saw it twice in the theater. I was brought to tears both times I watched it. Overall, I just found it to be a surprisingly moving film and a surprisingly important film. Things in terms of feminism and women having more time to talk.
I intensely disliked Wonder Woman, and I'm offended at your comments because it flies in the face of everything we were talking about, because you're judging a film about where it is, its importance with culturally versus its actual execution. My issues with Wonder Woman have to do with the plotting. What bumped for me is the villains, and once the gods started interfering with their world, that was a real problem for me.
Are you okay, Devon?
I'm okay now, but it's taken some moments of deep reflection and therapy.
It wasn't that mean.
I saw both sides. I saw that movie twice, and the first time I felt a little bit of what Devon was saying, and then the second time I agreed a lot more with you, JP.
Interesting. Okay. Cool. And I watched it again in preparation to watch the second one. So, but I pretty much felt the same. So yeah, that's what could make this a very contentious show. We'll see what the guys have to say. All right, guys, it's time for opening thoughts. And in order to keep the peace, I think I'm going to go Alex first. One sentence on Wonder Woman 1984.
I think the most important line in the whole film is I have a special relationship with Sears.
That's a great opening thought because it leaves us something to dig into. That's how it's done, Devon. Can you sum up your feeling in one sentence?
Even though parts were very enjoyable, this movie just fell too short too often to get behind. So overall, a disappointing miss.
This is not going to be as contentious as I thought. Yeah, this is much, much worse than the first one. So in that sense, it sounds like we're agreed, although there's room for interpretation as far as Alex is concerned. So with that said, I always like to start positive. For me, there's only one thing that I think I liked about the movie. What would you guys say was the best thing about the movie as far as you're concerned? And maybe we'll start there.
I like the production design of 1980s Washington, D.C. It created the atmosphere of the period well.
And like my notes about design, there was a lot going on, but I often felt like it was over the top and sometimes gaudy. Like I understand what you're saying from a very specific point of view in terms of how Patty Jenkins is approaching the period. But I mean, like I also felt like she was shoving the period down our throats. You know, I think about things like the very phallic Dreamstone MacGuffin that's at the heart of all the trouble.
Oh, yeah. The scene of them in Kristen Wiig's office, how it's positioned in the frame is ridiculous.
I felt like an overall lack of subtlety and nuance in a lot of different areas.
Let's not forget, though, JB, that the 80s, when they first came around, lacked in subtlety and originality.
I think that's part of the point. I think she was thinking excess, and so everything was made excessively, but it was almost clunky in that sense.
Clunky is a word that I wrote down 3 different times when I was taking some notes.
Okay, I can't believe we're having some agreement. Speaking of clunky, one of the things that I liked about the first one was I did think the World War I action scenes were pretty strong. There was noticeably and comparatively very little action in this particular film for some reason. And when there was action scenes, I found them to be unimaginative, uninteresting, poorly designed, poorly coordinated.
A lot of CG swinging around.
Special effects are a whole other thing. I was going to get to that. Not that it's a requirement to have action scenes, but if you're going to have some, they should at least be good. The next thing I was going to say is along the same lines, the special effects looked even more fake than in the first one. Primarily the shifts between live characters and the artificial computer generated ones that was constantly taking me out. Alex, you sort of moonlight as a stunt coordinator from time to time. What do you think about that?
It all kind of bumped for me. You know, I'm sure there's things they did technologically that'll help benefit other movies in the future.
Devon, do you have anything on the action scenes?
Clunky, similar to what you expressed. It didn't bother me in the first one when it was a little bit obvious when we were switching from live action to something that was an effect. Whereas in this one, I noticed constantly.
And do you think it has something to do with we're a lot closer to our modern era, so we felt like we needed a little more tactile?
I'll just say this completely out of context so it doesn't spoil anything. There's a scene where she lassos an RPG and saves 2 children playing soccer. It's just utterly ridiculous. And when they hit the ground, it's very obviously dummies for the children.
Yeah,
you would think that would be better handled in
the suspension of disbelief that we normally employ when watching a superhero film. They come in, that suspension comes willingly when it's done smoothly. Mm-hmm. And when we embrace the world. And this had so many moments that didn't feel smooth in the execution of that it just, I wasn't willing to suspend my disbelief about how absurd some of these action moments were. It was odd all around.
I think that can be an overall statement, which I'll get to, but I do want to call out the one thing that I liked about the film. To my mind, the best thing in the film was the characterization and performance of Kristen Wiig in the character of Barbara. Her insecurities and the deep-seated rage as a result felt more real than anything else in the film to me. It was identifiable, and her journey was mostly palpable. Some of that is on the page, but I thought Wiig brought a lot to it, especially navigating the metamorphosis. She was so good, in fact, I started wondering if a film that was more focused on her character as the only villain might have been more compelling to me, as if she were an extreme representative of the justifiable rage represented by the Me Too movement, and Wonder Woman would have to stop her, even though she sort of understands the root of her evolution, sort of like the Shades of Grey in that fake movie that I've invented for myself. Thought there was something there that the movie left on the table, but I thought Kristen Wiig did a good job, and that to me was the thing I liked the most.
I agree with you. It's funny, I was also imagining a better movie that did lean more on that subplot, and it did seem to be more relevant and just better handled.
I thought she did a good job with the character, and the way there's like a big turn that her character takes in the film. And it kind of reminded me of a lot of 80s female-oriented films like Love Potion No. 9, kind of that whimsy.
Devon, did you watch it with Kelly by chance?
Yes.
I wondered to myself, this fake movie that I thought would have been more compelling. I wondered if it was just me being a guy and not like, I wonder if a woman and a feminist would have felt the same way about that.
Well, as per previous No Name Cinema Society guidelines, we were trying to not talk very much.
I didn't realize you would do that internally. That's great. I didn't talk to me about it, or someone you're on the show with, but I think it's great. I have some notes on other performances, but they're not as relevant as all my screenplay complaints. But maybe real quick, I'll provide an opportunity and hopefully we can get through it quickly. Basically, my thought was Chris Pine is good. He's the best of the Chris's. He was the best part of the first one for me. I liked him again here, even though I thought it was ridiculous that he was there to begin with. I like Pedro Pascal. He was good. We argued about this in 2017, Devon. I just don't think Gal Gadot's a strong actor. I find her completely uninteresting without charm, presence, or any dimension at all. I understand she's a god or whatever. Maybe that's a challenge to play, but other people have done it. I would have hoped to see more of the 60 plus years on Earth weigh into her performance. And I just feel like I got very little from her. You disagreed about the first one. Do you still disagree?
I certainly thought, to me, it had much more of an emotional impact in the first one. That was a combination not just of her performance, but of so many other things that I felt were stronger.
I mean, at this point, I think they're stronger too by comparison.
There was so much that I wanted to root for in this movie because I did love the original, as you know. And the script, I think, was so much less strong in this one. And I was just like, this is just too clunky. And then she, I thought, was a little bit more reserved in this, which I think was called for because she was less of the fish out of water than she was.
But I mean, like, the return should have gotten more out of her. Like, you talk about a reserve. I didn't buy how reserved she was after he comes back.
Yeah, it wasn't great.
I found her even more wooden in this one than the first one. There was never a moment where I really cared.
So screenplay stuff, which is like really the main issue with the film. It's quite bad as far as I'm concerned. I think it's just a terrible, terrible script. They had ideas that they wanted to convey about the state of the world, which we will get to, I promise. But they took awful shortcuts and threw all plausibility out the window to get there. This movie takes great pains that in order to get what you wish, you have to make sacrifices. That's the point of the film. It's as if the screenwriters did just that, sacrificed sense and verisimilitude in order to convey a message or series of messages using the film as a platform for proposed societal change. Noble in concept, but I value story above all. So to me, there is no greater sin in storytelling. The counter argument is always, well, it's a fantasy film, and why am I talking about verisimilitude when we're talking about an Amazonian goddess in the middle of 1980s DC? But I think that's a lazy excuse. The very best fantasy or fantastical films work within a recognizable world. Even the Avengers, or perhaps the best example, would be the X-Men films. First Class is basically a work of strong historical fiction, and Wonder Woman, both of them could have been that. And furthermore, they're so blunt about it, like we've talked about the direction, that it feels to me like trite condescension. I've got plot holes aplenty to talk about. Before I get to, I mean, Devon, you sort of hinted at suspension of disbelief. They just push to the edge in order to get these points across.
Yeah, in so many ways, the filmmakers here were trying to do too much. We're trying to force too many things. We're trying to hit that finish line of making a kick-ass sequel to something we did, and therein lay their disaster.
Result-based screenwriting is the way I look at it. Alex, the contrivances in the script.
Even down to her living in the Watergate building, that's the most unimaginative thing that Hollywood filmmakers do when portraying characters that live in Washington, D.C. I agree with you about the result writing, which it also seemed like result directing too. This is where we're going to end up, and then you just try to build out from there.
That overlap with
the house first rather than the foundation.
She was more involved in the screenplay in this one, which may be the reason for some of the plot holes. Now, it's no secret that Chris Pine finds his way into the movie after dying in the first one. That's in the trailer. That's not really a spoiler. But how he gets there, I didn't buy it, which is sort of like the crux of the movie. Worse than that is it takes them 20 minutes before they're like, we should probably figure out how you're here.
That was one part that I was tickled by. I thought that was adorable, how they just want to make up for lost time and cuddle, etc.
That was a stretch for me, especially given the blasé nature of her performance. And it turns out his appearance is directly connected to Wonder Woman losing her powers. But conveniently, her powers don't just go away. They're just diminishing.
Why did she lose her powers?
They were just diminished.
She gets extra powers in this movie, too. None of it makes sense.
If he appears, they should just be gone, logically. But they need her to fight some battles before they're gone. Instead, they're just decreasing the powers. That's result-based screenwriting again.
It was muddy.
And then there's the whole Deus Ex Machina conclusion, which flies in the face to me of everything that the film's setting up, which I'm dancing around because, again, pushing to the T word. But then again, like, there's a lot of other things. What happened to the Dreamstone or the jet? You know, so many things just left hanging in a lazy, sloppy way. Too much suspension of disbelief.
Does she park the jet at the Watergate?
So the other thing about the screenplay that I wanted to mention, and hopefully I can sneak in, is it's about wholeness of world, which is a phrase I talk about a lot. And Marvel, it's not about wholeness of world in general in this movie, but it's also wholeness of world within the DC universe. And because Marvel set a high bar when it comes to this stuff, because all the films they connect and they all feel like they're in the same world. And as heightened as the world is, I believe when Ant-Man shows up in Captain America and so forth and so on. DC wanted to do something similar, but I feel like they're constantly breaking the rules. Like we've already seen Wonder Woman in the future, for example, where she has managed to keep her secret and do her do-gooding stuff anonymously. But I'm expected to believe that the events of this film take place and are pretty much forgotten by the time the Justice League happens. Like, this is a major historical thing that everybody conveniently forgets about by the time the Justice League comes around.
I feel like the scenes in the DC movies that have been coming out the last few years don't even feel like they're in the same universe, scene to scene in the same movie.
That's basically my next point. They seem to be changing the rules from film to film, like almost like to get cool new armor on her or to introduce the invisible jet somehow in a, to use Devon's word, clunky way. And they also set up something where a villain needs to touch someone in order to have an effect on them. And then they have a flimsy excuse to expand or break that rule. So it's all cheap tricks working backwards from an external result. And to me, they weren't able to make that work organically, which is a frequent issue with sequels that are rushed at the script stage. And that's basically what I can say for the whole script, Alex, is thin, questionable threads to hold together various goals the filmmakers had. The story they came up with didn't hold the weight of those goals as far as I'm concerned.
This film falls prey to what's been the case for action movies, especially comic book movies, for the last 15 years. And I include Marvel in this. Our producer will pick like 8 action sequences and say to a screenwriter, pick 5 and write a movie around them.
I don't feel that's true of Marvel films. Like, I actually feel like the action scenes tend to, happen organically.
The Marvel films do it better, but definitely the Sony films and the Warner Brothers films, I think, suffer from this.
Superhero aspects or superhero worlds aside, I feel like this film fell into the pitfalls typical of many sequels in general, which is over-relying on elements that worked well in the original. It's so wanting to recapture that lightning in a bottle. Maybe you didn't like the film as much, JB, or but a lot of people did, like I did.
That subtle dig, ladies and gentlemen, sort of subtle, like...
No, I'm just saying, it did capture lightning in a bottle in a way that made them try too hard to recapture it and try to do so by relying on these elements that did work before. Relying too much on, well, you'll just go with it. And it's like, no, we won't necessarily just go with that.
I agree about trying to recapture the original almost as if they try to force it. They try to insert it uncomfortably into this film.
Yeah.
That's the weight of having to do a sequel, is to feel the need to echo the original. Just make a continuation without feeling that you need to hit these points. You're limiting yourself even further.
Thought the rules of electricity didn't make any sense in this movie.
And add that to the list of travel and contrivances.
The rules of electricity and flight are really in flux.
Oh, the flight stuff. I mean, I guess we're being generic about it, but yes, I had flight on my list of plot holes that didn't make sense to me, but then I'm like, oh, maybe that's a spoiler, and I let it go. All right, Alex, what time is it?
It's time for the T word.
It's time for the T word! This is the part of our show that sets us apart from the other review shows. We dig deep, ladies and gentlemen. We talk about the themes of the film, what it is to us. And unfortunately, this film was hardly shy about making its point. So I'm going to start with something that might get us into a fight. What I think was the main points of the film, to me, that the film was making its point against greed and by extension, global capitalism in general. And this is where things get dangerous because it's something that I disagree with fundamentally with both Devon and Alex. The film suggests that the lust for power of just a few have the potential to send us into international chaos. But that fails to recognize that the basic tenets of capitalism were designed because humans by nature are indeed motivated by a certain amount of greed. And other economic schools of thought like socialism and communism have proved to be just as corruptible as capitalism, with the difference being that the latter has built-in safeguards that at least acknowledge the natural desires of mankind. The film goes so far to almost unintentionally suggest that the very idea of desire is dangerous. Our dreams and goals require sacrifice, and at what price glory? The question itself is legitimate, but I don't think it's a positive thing to quash dreams or goals. It's not the wanting that's the issue, it's how you get there. It's like we were talking about when we talked about Mank just a couple weeks ago. It's not that they were wealthy that makes them bad, it's that they lied. So here the villains are bad not because they wanted something badly, it's because they took shortcuts to get there that rolled over other people. So the trick is to achieve our goals without breaking the law or rolling over others to get there. It's not supposed to be easy. It wouldn't be worth it if it were. So guys, greed and capitalism is a theme. I think it's hard to deny that it's there, but I'm sure you're going to argue about my opinion.
It feels so convoluted to even be about capitalism versus socialism in this film, that it just seemed to say that you shouldn't wish for anything. You should settle for mediocrity and just knowing your place.
It's funny because I don't think it intended to do that, but I did feel like that was a potential interpretation. I agree that that's there because they don't show the positive side of wanting. They make you feel bad about having these goals and desires without making it about the fact that these guys were using shortcuts.
Yeah. What they were trying to say, I think, was a bit more nuanced than just don't want things. They were trying to say, don't just want things in this empty way, where it's just about wanting more, not even recognizing that there's going to be an impact. It's going to affect someone else. And you need to consider that. You need to consider others. You need to consider the consequences, as well as the ways that you get those wants. Did it do that well? No. This is a whole other conversation, so we're probably not going to really spend any time here. But you said something that is literally the opposite of what I think, which is you said that there's safeguards with capitalism that honor human nature. No, that's the whole point. There are not safeguards in place with pure capitalism.
There are, but the issue is the system can get corrupted and people they break through the safeguards, using their financial clout. So
that's built into capitalism.
There are laws, but they're breaking the laws. So they're taking a chance by breaking the laws, whereas
laws are basically socialism. Like, laws are there to rein in capitalism, full stop. I think this film could have successfully tackled some of those heady themes and was trying to, and just was not successful. And part of why it wasn't successful is because it lost some of the emotional grounding that the first film had in terms of Wonder Woman as this feminist icon, an unlikely feminist icon, which I think you mentioned in our top 10 discussion of it, because so many modern feminist figures have moved past the kind of old-fashioned gee whiz perspective that Diana has in the first film. There was no focus on any of those core human, emotional questions. It was just a hackneyed statement about capitalism that, didn't work.
I think we're all agreed that it didn't work. But one thing that you said relating to dealing with others that feeds directly into my other theme, and that is compassion and the role it plays in society, which landed a little bit better than the anti-capitalism statement, or what I interpreted as an anti-capitalism statement. One of the more believable things to me in the film was that both of the villains were essentially created by their insecurities that were born out of the way that they were treated by others. And both of their shifts to the dark side could have been avoided by someone showing them some compassion or kindness somewhere along the way. The villain of our modern world is, of course, Donald Trump, who also seems to be driven by deep insecurities, and the deeper the hate towards him grew, the more he dug in. It makes you wonder if compassion and understanding might have made a difference somewhere along the line. I watched It's a Wonderful Life just a few days ago on Christmas Day. It's a solid reminder that whether we're young or we're old, we leave an imprint on others as we pass through life, both positive and negative. And with that in mind, instead of constantly judging others for what they are not, we could try appreciating them for what they are. The greed that Max Lord and Cheetah and Donald Trump display is ultimately less about money and power than it is about respect. They're driven by what others think of them, and that puts the power in our hands on some level if we choose to use it. That's what, to me, that ridiculous ending is all about. I didn't think it made sense in the context of the narrative. It is something of a rallying cry for compassion and understanding that requires a level of selflessness that would be a departure for humans as a race. It would be a key first step if we genuinely want things to improve. Again, this is not to say that we can't want things for ourselves, but instead, if it's just about understanding about what others want and desire as well. It's very similar to what you're saying. The Venn diagram of our themes, I think there's an intersect there.
I agree. That's part of how this film lost its way, because it wasn't sticking to the powerful, simpler themes of the original. If we believe that human beings are always going to just be terrible and self-centered and self-interested, then we will continue to be self-interested and terrible and never evolve. But I think there's enough evidence to dictate otherwise, that there are major swaths of the population that are evolving and that are moving towards better compassion, better understanding, better selflessness. It's uneven and frustrating, but that doesn't mean that it's not possible. And that's one of the themes that was so strong in the first one and was not executed here.
You agree it was there, it sounds like.
Yes, I do. I think it was trying to say that at the end in a similar way, but it was so much less focused. It was trying to squeeze in 3 or 4 different kind of statements about these major world systems and about each of our decisions as individuals. And it was just too much and complicated the whole thing.
Easy statement about the film. It bit off more than it can chew, for sure. Alex, compassion as it relates to our society.
I didn't really find that to be the theme. I thought Kristen Wiig's character, when there's multiple times in the film she brings up that Gal Gadot's character is extremely patronizing and condescending throughout. I thought her character in this film was kind of a selfish asshole.
I think that's my point about the compassion, because even Wonder Woman displayed these moments of lack of compassion, which fed into Kristen Wiig's insecurities, which led to her rage. My point was that more compassion could prevent the Cheetahs, the Max Lords, and the Donald Trumps of the world. Even though they're wrong, they were all sort of disrespected. What the film is saying, or trying to say, to Devon's point, it's not necessarily about judging what's wrong with others. The creation of these villains in this movie could have been prevented with trying to understand their strengths instead of constantly judging, oh, well, she's socially awkward or she's not pretty enough. You know, it's this constant cycle because, you know, she feels those things and then she interprets Diana's comments to be condescending and patronizing, you know, but that's not necessarily the case. You're right. Diana didn't always show her compassion, but that feeds the beast, which is why I think the argument is for more overall compassion towards others.
I think that's just arrogant and ridiculous.
Yes, it's ridiculous. That doesn't make it not the point. So much about this movie is ridiculous, but I mean, what we're talking about now is what it was potentially trying to achieve. I think it failed on so many levels. Like, I think what we're saying now is what we think it wound up being about. It certainly wanted to be about this. You said it's not a theme, but I mean, I feel like the arguments that you're making are suggesting that it is a theme. It's just did it badly.
Maybe so. I didn't feel like this film had a clear sense of its own voice either.
Okay.
It seemed like the film was more focused on aesthetics and superficial feelings.
You don't think it was trying to achieve some of these like socio-political goals that Devon, I feel like, drowned the film?
I think maybe it was trying.
Anything else you guys want to say before I say goodnight?
If you already have HBO Go and you can watch this movie at no additional cost to you, okay. Should you spend $17 to $20 to go to the theater? I'd say no.
HBO Max.
Yeah, I would say the same thing, except that the irony of that statement is I really do think it would have been a better experience on the big screen.
It wouldn't have solved those script problems.
No, it wouldn't have. It still would have been just a slightly more enjoyable experience.
We are going to try and squeeze in one more set of episodes before breaking to focus on the finales that we're doing. All that depends on the release schedule, which, as you know, is constantly shifting. If all goes to plan, the soonest we'd be back is with a review of Liam Neeson in The Marksman on Thursday, January 28th. So that's the current plan, but I'm acknowledging the possibility that that's going to change. I'm actually kind of skeptical. We might wind up waiting until mid to late February to do something closer to the end of Oscar eligibility, which ends on February 28th. So stay tuned on Instagram for updates. Our next show, however, is going to be our first show of the calendar year 2021, Monday, January 4th. I'll have Kelly and Zach with me for our Indie Spotlight. We're going to do the film 45 Years from 2015, and that's coming up in just a few days after we change the calendar. So, guys, Happy New Year to you both.
Happy New Year to you.
And say goodnight to the audience.
Good night, everyone. I guess if you're watching this in the morning too, you know.
Happy New Year. Happy New Year to the audience. We'll see you on Monday. And until then, ladies and gentlemen, this meeting of the No Name Cinema Society is adjourned.